So thank you very much, Ilka, for the invitation to speak today at the BCCG SHeconomy series. I think I'm going to get t-shirts printed saying I'm still on mute or you're still on mute and sell them. I think I might make a lot of money, but I think in terms of Zoom, it is an opportunity to make connections, and I'm very privileged to be able to join you today. As we've heard, the First Minister needs me at 5 o'clock. Nicola Sturgeon is driving our response to COVID, so I must go off for that meeting. But I want to reflect on my personal journey a bit as a woman and a leader in politics and my experience in business, and then move on to some other issues, particularly around COVID and how we need to make sure that as women in leadership roles, we understand the impact of COVID on women and how that has implications for our economy. I am the Cabinet Secretary for the economy in the Scottish Government. I have been a minister for some time, but I want to maybe start at the beginning. A long time ago, my first involvement in politics, long before I was elected. And I was lucky because my party, the Scottish National Party, you know, has a female First Minister and leader, Nicola Sturgeon. But even before that, there were very strong role models. We had Winnie Ewing, who was one of the first MEPs from Scotland, who was known as Madame Ecosse for many years. And we had other women in very strong roles, which was perhaps unusual in the 1970s and the 1980s and even into the 1990s. My best advisor, I think, was my mother. My mother had said to me, when I was a young mother with children, she says, never feel guilty. And I think never feel guilty has probably helped me through a lot of difficult times on a personal basis. But I also remember a former leader of my party, when I told him that I was expecting my first child, and that leader is now has died a few years back, had saying to me, I thought you were serious about politics. Now, I was in company with men at the time, and they reacted very strongly to him. And I think you could tell by looks that he'd said something wrong. So he said, oh no, I was only joking. But I don't think he was. I think he just had spoke what he thought. But at that time, I thought things changed. And we've seen so much change over a long period of time for so many women. I think the most seminal time for me, though, was I first got elected to the reconvened Scottish Parliament in 1999. And at that point, there was I was involved in trying to encourage more women to stand. And I was very successful in my own party to get more to stand. But we achieved over 30% in that first Scottish Parliament elected as women. And I think that tipping point is still there in so many different ways. I also think that you need to see role models. I think all of you on the call appreciate that. But I think it's an important point that we can't take anything for granted. And that although you might have a pyramid, and a pyramid where at the top you'll see women in high profile positions and leaders, but quite often in business, as you do see in politics, it's further down at local community level, in local councils, or indeed in perhaps middle management areas that you might not see as many women. The one thing I would also reflect on, apart from my t-shirt about being muted, being sold in the shops anytime soon, is I think we've also learned from Zoom in other ways, in that the idea as a woman that you had to be present at everything quite often put women off, that there had to be a physical presence at meetings or indeed in offices to whatever hour with your jacket on the chair so people knew you were there. And I think that was one of the first strains, particularly as a woman, and many women have seen that when I was working at Standard Life. I worked in financial services for many, many years. And I was probably my most productive when I was time limited because of my children, and you focused on what you had to do. I think the Zoom in the virtual world, it's also been helpful that actually we could probably be more reflective of society by enabling this continuous activity where you don't actually have to physically be in the room to be present in the room. And I think that's one of the lessons that I hope that we can continue going forward. But in turning to the wider themes, I am very pleased to tell you in Scotland that we have had a sea change in recent years. We've had our first female First Minister, Nicola Sturgeon, since 2014. Now in the Cabinet, women outnumber the men. Our permanent secretary, that's our most senior civil service servant, is a woman. The Scottish Government Director General for the Economy is a woman. Myself as the Cabinet Secretary for Economy, female, and we also have a female Finance Secretary as well. And that's quite important, I think, in terms of how we've dealt with the crisis, because Kate Forbes, our Finance Secretary, and myself, I mean, we speak on a daily basis and we make things happen, and we do it in a cooperative way. It's not about positioning, it's about solution focus, but it's also about tacking and adapting and being flexible. And I think some of those traits that I think women can bring to leadership are really important. Our chief executive of the recently launched Scottish National Investment Bank, it's been set up to help Scotland transition to net zero carbon emissions through investment in small and medium-sized enterprises, is a woman. The chief executive of the Scottish Chambers is a woman, and the general secretary of our Scottish Trades Unions Congress is a woman. So I don't know what's been happening in Scotland in recent years, but I think that's a broad statement that, you know, we have leaders not just in the traditional areas of perhaps health and social policy, but also in business and also in the economy more generally. Of course, that's not always been the case, and there's still challenges of what we need to do. Our commitment to gender equality as a government is really strong. We have to foster and support female leaders, but we also have to reset our approach, because unless we reset our society and our economy and build a greener, fairer and more equal society, my daughter, your daughters, will be still facing some of the issues that others have faced in the past as well. And I think the impacts of COVID in particular have had real impacts and made us think about the inequalities that exist. I think COVID has reinforced so much of the inequality that exists in our society, both the direct and the indirect effects of the illness itself. And labour markets, due to the lockdown measures previously and the restricted measures now, have had a disproportionate and longer term impact on women, and for a number of reasons. We know that women are more likely to work part-time, they're less likely to have secure employment, they earn less on average than men, and they're less likely to be eligible for sick pay. Now that's really important when we're looking at further restrictions and when we're looking at isolation as part of the test, trace and isolate policy, how we can make sure women are supported. And of course, we know that the disproportionate shouldering of unpaid caring responsibility makes it harder to maintain or take on employment issues, and that can limit the number of hours they can work, or indeed could work during a time when the schools were closed, which also means that there's a challenge for when the furloughs schemes that many countries have, and we have as well, unwind. It may be women that we are worried about that may have a bigger impact there in terms of who is kept on and who is not kept on in employment. But also, I think those challenges around career progression, inhibited by number of, as I said, present a more vulnerable situation, and also the UK government's welfare cuts have disproportionately impacted on women. So single parents particularly are one of the groups that we really have to ensure are supported when the economic effects of the crisis are really felt. And I think that's going to be one of the challenges that we have in how do we take things forward, how do we deal with things. And the fallout from the COVID-19 pandemic, as well as Brexit, is going to put pressure on the gender employment gap and the gender pay gap in our country in the coming years. Now, you're probably aware the Scottish Government is pro the EU, we're pro-European, we want to be part of that family, but we're facing a post-Brexit UK landscape. And one of the key issues is the potential rollback of some of the hard-fought EU-derived employment projections and the protections for pregnant women, part-time workers. And that's something that we're very concerned about. So what can we do, and as a responsible government, to mitigate some of these impacts? Well, one thing is clear, as you're probably all aware, the crisis has given us a chance to challenge traditional ways of working. There are real opportunities for change as we renew Scotland. Early on the pandemic, I established an economic recovery group, an expert advisory group back in March to provide recommendations for Scotland's economic recovery that put well-being at its heart. And the well-being approach to economic decision making is endorsed by the OECD. It recognises there are 4 capitals that make up the economy: economic, human, natural and social, and they all have to be in balance to create that well-being economy. So based on the advisory group's recommendations, we're implementing a change in respect of equality. We're going to embed a rights approach across the entire spectrum, and we've explicitly committed to upholding 7 principles that reflect issues around human dignity, autonomy, respect and equality as we deal with the pandemic and its consequences in our framework for decision making. So a lot of our decisions and what can be relaxed, for example, through COVID, have put women and children at the heart of the decision making. One of the other things the Scottish Government has done, in June this year, we established an advisory board on social renewal. And that also is about a drive to come through the COVID situation, not to go back to where we were, but to build a fairer, more equal Scotland. And that social renewal approach is going to be very, very important as part of that wellbeing funding that we've delivered as well. So I think equality brings quality. Equality is fundamental to a robust and resilient economy. It's about unlocking the potential and creativity that people have. It's about having a better balanced society. And although COVID has been very hard for many people, I think the idea of a balanced society has been brought more to the fore. We have a number of policy areas on tackling gender inequality. Scotland was the first country in the world to provide access to free monthly period products in schools, colleges and universities. We've extended that out to local community facilities so women who need them can access them. And we've also trying to tackle the stigma associated with period poverty. We have a gender pay gap action plan to try and tackle some of those issues. And we also have action on public boards where we're trying to ensure that we can have a gender representation of objective of 50% of its non-exec members must be women. And currently, where Scottish ministers are responsible, currently 51% of non-executive board members are women. But we also want to have the right type of growth. We want to see economic growth, but a well-being economy embraces fair work. Part of my job title is economy and fair work. And that's really important in terms of how we ensure that we have that green, fair, equal approach to the type of society and economy that we want. Obviously, we're not the only people that are taking the priority of equality very seriously. The European Commission President, Ursula von der Leyen, also has put equality at the centre stage and moved very swiftly to have that gender equal college of commissioners. And I was very struck when she was launching the equality strategy from the EU, that she said, in business, politics and society as a whole, we can only reach our full potential if we use all our talent and diversity. Using only half of the population, half of our ideas and half of the energy is not good enough. So that's when I say equality, I think, brings quality as well. We've obviously seen the Chancellor, Angela Merkel, in terms of her specific focus on supporting gender justice and also looking at the gender specific impacts of the COVID pandemic. We've seen the experience, for example, in their work with their female Prime Minister. And along with, and I don't think this is governments of New Zealand and Iceland, the Scottish Government has formed the Wellbeing Economy Governments Partnership. And that's grown organically through existing networks, and other governments are joining us. And I suspect that what people might see as the new normal will in fact be a wellbeing economy being centre stage as what that renewal should look like. So there are challenges throughout for all of us. Climate change, other areas really make us think about what we need and what we can do as leaders to help drive some of those issues. Scotland will be hosting the UK COP26 next year, and we have to make sure that that fair transition is part of that agenda. So finally, I think I might reflect that yes, progress has been made. It's clear that the world could use much more female leadership. There's only 19 countries out of the 193 in the UN are run by women, so there's room there for improvement. But I just think in that vein, I want to finish with a quote and in tribute to the inspiring Ruth Bader Ginsburg, Associate Justice of the Supreme Court of the United States from 1993 to sadly just recently. And she was the only second woman to serve on the US Supreme Court. And she said, and she was a tireless advocate for gender equality, she said, when I'm sometimes asked, when will there be enough women on the Supreme Court? And I say, when there are 9, people are shocked. But there'd been 9 men for many, many years, and nobody's ever raised a question about that. So I think that puts things in perspective, that although things can be visible, there's still a long way to go. And I hope, Ilka, I've given you a sense of a personal reflection of my experience in politics in my early years, where I am now, how we're trying to take a gendered view of the recovery and renewal as we're dealing with COVID, but also that international perspective. I joined politics to change the world, but it's fantastic to see women leaders across the world changing lives and changing them for good. So thank you very much, Ilka, and perhaps we have some time for some questions.
Well, dear Fiona, thank you so much for the I don't even know where to start. It was a wonderful speech and very encouraging, because Scotland has changed a lot of things. So yes, thank you so much. I don't want to take the floor. So whoever wants to ask a question, please use the camera, raise your hand, use the chat, and go ahead and ask a question. Until the first ones get brave enough. You mentioned that you thought that something happened in Scotland the latest years. You get more people, more women in politics and on boards. You said you had to foster it, but how do you do that in politics? Do you have mentees? Do you have a mentoring program? Do you have a program for young females where you encourage them to enter into politics?
There's far more programs now than when I was involved 20 years ago. The Parliament itself has been very good at helping women to stand and to help provide opportunities. There are mentoring programs tended to be in a party space. In fact, just before I came on, I got a text from my mentee that I'm due to meet next week. So there are more formal mechanisms. We had to make a step change. It was going to take forever at the rate we were going. So at the last Scottish Parliament elections, my own party, the Scottish National Party, took a decision to ensure that whenever the MD was standing down or retiring, it was an all-female list that came forward for that seat. Now, that was highly controversial, but actually now it's been taken as read. So as we go into our next elections, as of now, because our elections are next year, we're also doing it, and there has been no fuss about it whatsoever. There was fuss 5 years ago, but not as much fuss now.
We have a question from Karen. Karen asked,
see it?
Can you read it? Okay.
So she's asking about, have we had a step back? There are actually fewer women now than there were in 1999. Can I say that also that's why the party side of it makes such a difference. When we first reconvened the Scottish Parliament back in 1999 with devolution, I was part of an all-party group trying to get more women to stand, but we quickly realised that each political party had its own culture, and we had to try and tackle it different ways. So the Labour Party had they had a gender balance, that there had to be 50-50 in terms of the number standing. For us, we had a debate. We tried to make a force mechanism, and we had an enormous debate. It was lost and lost narrowly, but the party took the decision then to actually look at women and put them forward. So we got 40% at the end. The reason why I think we've gone backwards, and it's not a party political point, but the Conservative Party won far more seats than they expected, and they have a bit. I mean, less than, I think they've only got 3 or 4 women out of about 20 odd. So that really took the numbers back in 2016. But I'm hopeful that all parties for the elections next year in 2021 will improve. But that temporary setback was because of one party in particular. But that's why getting individual parties to commit to things that will change them internally is really critical.
You also mentioned what's been said in Germany as well, that COVID really is a drawback for gender equality in the business with women. We say that, but so far there are no instruments or programs installed that could prevent that or work against it. It's just that women get paid if they stay at home, but it looks like it's the mother's job again to take care.
Yeah.
It's not going away in a few days. So what can we do? What kind of programs can step in for that?
I think there's something around that I mentioned about making sure that women can get paid if they're self-isolating. I think that's a basic one because many women don't. In terms of the childcare issues, it's also, how do we get fair work statements? So back at the beginning of COVID, along with our trade union council Congress, we produced a joint statement between us. I managed to get a refresh one done in June with the Institute of Directors and more business organisations, and it's how they would treat people generally. And I think we need one for women. I think we need some kind of fair work statement through COVID from employers that they will not discriminate against women when they're making decisions about who can do what. They should ensure that the home working is still the default in Scotland. That has benefited women, but women really suffered when the schools weren't back because they were working all hours. And if they had a partner, they were, as you possibly the same in your country, they were staggering, when they had 2 hours on, 2 hours off. But if you're a single mum on your own, that's a real challenge.
We have another question from Juliana. Can you read it?
Yeah, and she's talking about feminist politics. I had the pleasure of meeting Sweden's, now foreign minister when she was the trade minister, when the Nordic Council came and convened. Iceland kindly decided that Scotland was the right place to host a Nordic Council meeting, and I think that's maybe preparing for the future when Scotland as an independent country can be part of that wider community of Nordic and indeed further European countries. And she at that point had just launched Sweden's feminist trade policy, and she was explained to me about even basic things about tariffs on men's shirts and women's blouses and the discriminatory impact on a purely financial basis, which now she said that when they first embarked on this, that they weren't sure that they would find the evidence to demonstrate that there was some kind of difference between how trade policy was being affected on goods and services affecting men versus women, but they actually found that evidence, and so I immediately took a copy of that feminist trade policy from Sweden and took it back to our trade minister saying, what are you going to do with that? So we obviously have got challenges ahead, but I think that's a very good way of thinking about things. It's not. It might seem as if you're odd and you're being radical, but actually we're just owning the territory that men have had for many years. So we're positioning, we're looking through the lens of everything can be seen through that gendered perspective. And that's what we're trying very hard in Scotland to do. And you can make changes that might have been seen potentially by the old, dare I say, male-dominated politics as being peripheral, and we make what they see as women's peripheral issues, we make them centre because they are centre to women's lives. So people wouldn't have thought that period poverty was something that was central to people's lives, but it is. There are many women who suffer every month because they can't afford to have the basic facilities that everybody else has. So I think there's something around, you sometimes have to take a lens, like a gender equality lens, to see what's in front of you, because actually sometimes that lens has been focused on what, as if it was a peripheral issue, when actually many things to do with women, poverty, jobs, children, health, equality, they are centre. And I think if you have a well-being economy that balances those four capitals that I talked about, I think we might be happier as well as anything else. And I think well-being is about a state of mind and an experience. And the economy absolutely matters. I'm the economy secretary. I want to see us recover. I want to see us growth. But at what price? And at what price have women been paying for the type of economic growth we've had in the past?
Yes, I'm looking at the watch, but one more thing, very encouraging what Juliana says. Yes, I would say so. I think we really have to start very early in school years, in senior school and in college, for example, to really encourage the women, the young women, to stand for themselves. I can see that from my daughter, in school, the girls are the better ones, but the minute they reach college, the boys start to use their elbows. And it starts when you go to a first job. I think this is where really the women we are in business already can help them. And I think mentoring, like you do in politics, which is very important, is something we all should do.
So I'm afraid I am going to have to come off. We have looked at making home working a right, but we want to try and work with businesses. So that's going to be one of the issues that we're debating, but we want to make it as a voluntary right rather than a legislative one just now, but who knows where things might go. I've noticed that from Wendy. So I have been paying attention to the chat bar, but Ilka, I know this has been a bit rushed. I probably, as a Scot, we always talk very quickly, so I hope I haven't been lost on you too much, but I'm more than willing to come back at some point to talk about politics, the economy, or other areas, and we greatly value our relationship with Germany. I've been in Berlin at the hub several times. We've got a great female team, I might add, at the Berlin hub, so yeah. I hope to continue to work with you in the future. Okay.
Thank you very much, Fiona, and all the best to the First Minister. And we let you go now.
Thank you very much.
I will just ask everybody else if there's anything you want to. You can just go.
I can go. Bye.
Thank you. So to everybody else, we would have loved to have that a little longer. If you still have questions or ideas that arise after this session, you might send them to us. We are happy to discuss this with Alexandra Stein and her team who are online. We will send you a link to this video, which the session today was recorded, and also we will receive the full speech of Fiona Hyslop, which we then of course share with every one of you. Very, very sorry that it was not more time, but I'm very grateful that the secretary really took the time not to cancel, but to speak to us. And I think there were a lot of encouraging words in her speech. The next SHeconomy will be on October 27th with Joanne Hunger from the Western Union, another British citizen. You might have a little look on Brexit, on female business, and also on maybe some currency topics. I hope you will all join, and we'll send the invite within this week. So all that's left to say from me is thank you all for participating, and I really hope that you enjoyed, and we will let you know as soon as we have a new date for Politic Talk with Fiona Hyslop, and wish you all the best. Stay healthy, stay away from Corona, and keep your spirits up. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.